There's been a lot of changes with marriages going on, from the amount of people getting married to the amount of divorce happening. I started thinking, what's some of the reasons that this is happening? Well, let's talk about it. First, we need to talk about what makes marriage a thing to begin with. It first started with things such as land disputes. Um, Marrying families would solve their land issues with that. You had economic reasons, which was the men would provide, the women would take care of the home. That was a common thing back then. And then you had religious reasons, you're bonding in front of God and committing in front of God in the church, all those things. And now the most common thing is love, with I believe 90% of couples saying that they marry for love. But there are some interesting things going on with marriage right now. Right now, most people say that the divorce rate is above 50%. I can't find any like hard, solid proof on that one. Most people report just 40 to 50%. So I'll say that the divorce rate is between 40 to just above 50%. The average marriage lasts 8.2 years. If you get married between the ages of 20 and 25, you have a 60% chance of divorce rate. If you wait till you're over 25, your chances of divorce decrease by 24%. If you're working on a second marriage, you have a 67% chance of divorce. And if you are working on your third marriage, you have a 73% chance of divorce. That's pretty alarming. To say that if you get married to someone, it's a 50-50 chance that I'm probably going to get divorced or we're going to stay together, which is very interesting. So there's a lot of arguments going on with why that is, and there's been some arguments from political views, religious views, and economical views. But I also wanted to take a deeper look into things such as, why are people getting married? The reason that I wanted to do this is because I was thinking about some things. You hear a lot of people say that the reason that they want to get married is because of love. I've talked before in some videos about my opinion on things being more emotional than not, and that's that emotions are a roller coaster. Your emotions are going to be up, your emotions are going to be down. So when you have that as your base foundation, typically for marriage, versus the economic view, the religious views, things like that, then things get a little bit different. But then I started wondering, is love the most important thing as far as marriage goes? And I would like to argue that I actually think it's the second most important thing. So what brought me on to this is, I was thinking, because somebody had made a post and they said that I heard that my 30s was supposed to be better than my 20s. And they were like, but I'm not finding my 30s to be better than my 20s. My 20s was wild and fun. Now I'm in my 30s. It's not as wild, it's not as fun. I'm kind of more of just at home, relaxing, which is okay. And it made me think, what's the difference with that? Well, when you're in your teen years and when you're in your 20s, you tend to have more people around you, more friends, people from high school. You're going to college, you have people from college that's with you. You've got your friends you joke with, you go out with, you have fun. As you get older, you don't necessarily have that anymore. So what do we typically do? We typically look for companionship to fill that void. We look for somebody who can be our best friend. And that's where I believe a strong thing in marriage should come from, is companionship. And the reason why is because it gives you so much more to rely on. So what I did was I went and talked to multiple couples, married couples. I've talked to people who have been divorced. I've talked to people who are being engaged, and I've talked to new marriages. So people who have been in marriages for up to 55 years. That was the oldest one that I had, 55-year marriage. And I talked to somebody who's only been married for 2 years. So to get different views on things like that. One of the most common things that I heard from the people was at the time of them being married, they felt as if that person was their companion. So your most successful relationships, when you ask them, you go, were you two best friends? Not necessarily best friends, but in that realm of things, that person was the first person you wanted to talk to. That person was the first person you wanted to see. They were pretty much up there in your daily life. Those people tend to make it. And the reason I believe so is because the number one reason for divorce is a lack of commitment. All right. Well, actually, I think it's finances, then a lack of commitment, which, yeah, we'll talk about that a different time. But the lack of commitment is huge. However, people have the ability to commit. So that was an interesting thing to me, is the lack of commitment. And one of the examples I used is a majority of people could go run a marathon next year. Majority of people are healthy enough, they have an able body, they can do it, they can go run a marathon. And I always say, well, why don't you go out and start training for that marathon today? The reason is because you don't want to. So I can commit to anything that I want to in life, but I have to have a want to commit. And as I talk to people, the thing that tends to make them want to commit is the fact that that person is seen as their best friend. That you're losing more than just a relationship, you're losing more than a lover, you're losing your best friend, which is something that's a little bit harder. And that's why I say I would put companionship over love, because when you see that person as a high value to you in your life, whereas love can kind of, it's hard to explain, because yes, you love that person that's your companion, but I mean like that feeling of like, wow, I'm in love with this person. That can flame off. After you've been married a few years, you're not typically in that honeymoon phase. You fall out of the honeymoon phase. Whereas if you were in that's still your best friend, that's still your person, you still have a level of respect. And that was another word that kept coming up as well when I talk to people. They say that the respect matters. So having respect for a person, which I've spoken about this before, I said the respect is one of the most important things, your loyalty, duty, respect. And you get that respect through certain things. But being a good companion is one of those things. Also, the length of the companionship matters as well, because there is a such thing as infatuation. So if you're sitting there and you're kind of like quickly falling for someone, I've learned that there's an infatuation stage, and then when the waters get a little deep, when things get tough, that companionship that you thought you had is not the same thing. Another thing that goes into the commitment that I've been hearing as well as answers from people is a background of a person really matters. And this one is always a very interesting one for me. So I spoke to one person, and he talked about the families respecting each other. If you're, as far as this one was a little bit different. I don't want to go into too much detail and talk about this person, but they had a thing where their families had respected each other. And through that's passed down to the kids. The kids can kind of see where you come from, and they respect that. Now, the way that I would equate that is that typically the way that you are raised also is the way that you present yourself. It's a big part of it. So there's three things that I give to a big part of that. And that's how you were raised, so your family background, your religious beliefs, and your political views. I believe that most people are governed by how they were raised, religion, political views. It controls things that you tend to do and see. And then some people would say, well, hold on now, because there's a lot of people who are religious, yet they sin. However, this is a very important part to me. So, like premarital sex, for instance, I'm a Christian, and if I have premarital sex, you're like, well, that's not very Christian of you. But also at the same time, I'm speaking just on how you're governing your life, the direction you're going in. The fact that I still acknowledge that that's wrong, I shouldn't be doing this, is me acknowledging that religious belief. And so when I spoke to people about their religious beliefs, it's actually tends to be a huge part. People tend to want to have their spouse within the same religious belief, on the same political views as them. And the reason that they do that is because it is how you tend to build. It's how you tend to go forward. So if you have one person who is a Christian and you have one person who's atheist, well, what you're going to get is you're going to get a relationship where somebody is governing their rules by the Bible. They're kind of going off of things that they learned in the church, they learned growing up, whereas a person who is without religion, they're typically kind of going more off of feelings, or if they're spiritual, they're going off of some sort of spirituality, things like that, which I thought was very interesting. So you're looking at two people and you could be building in two different directions. This person's trying to build this way and this person's trying to build this way, and you start to pull away from the whole. Same thing with politics. As much as people like to stay away from politics because it causes an argument, and they're like, no, politics, people should have their own politics. But but when you really get to it and you ask a person, hey, does it matter? Typically they say yes, it does, because they do want to make sure that they are building in the same direction. You might not have the same ideas. You might want white counters in the kitchen and this person wants gray counters in the kitchen, but at the same time, both of you are working in the kitchen and building the kitchen. You're on the same page. Whereas if you have two people of two different views, this person's trying to build in the kitchen and this person's out here building a pool, and you're asking them, well, what do you want the counters to be? And this person's like, don't worry about this. How deep do you want the pool to be? You're on two different pages, and it kind of doesn't make sense to go in that direction. Another thing is people also pointed to obligation. I've learned that obligation is not necessarily a strong one. So it is strong for a short run. When people tend to have obligations that they're fulfilling, you only want to fulfill those obligations so long. When you see that you're done with that obligation, you're like, you know what, I'm good with it. As well as when times really start to get hard, if you have a way out of an obligation, you're going to take it. It's just like a bad contract. If you can get out of a bad contract, you're going to get out of a bad contract. However, if you feel some type of loyalty to that person, you're like, look, let's try and figure out a way to make this work. So it's two different things. So I thought that was very interesting as well, that obligations tend to have a negative effect versus those who have a loyalty and a companionship to their partner. And then another big one, so if a couple has, and this is where I say that infatuation period, we're going to jump back to infatuation periods. So another thing is broken trust. Those who had broken trust within their marriages, I asked them, I said, okay, so then what turned things around? What typically created the issues? Typically they had a shorter dating period. There was a shorter dating period, and so that companionship was not as strong. It was typically weaker, which often led to broken trust issues, infidelity, abuse of substances, or financial issues, things like that. And that was the most interesting thing to me, because typically people who had these issues dated less than a few years. And when I say dated, I mean like serious adult dating over the age of 18. I really don't care what somebody did when they were 15, 16 years old. Let's see you in your adulting phase. When people, those adulting years, it was typically less than 2 years of dating. and then they got married, and they typically don't have that companionship with each other. Like they have it, they felt like they were best friends, but that trust was so easy to break. It's like you having a lifelong friend. I've known them since I was a child. I've known them since high school, stuff like that. That person, you're typically working with them to um, continuously work on what y'all have versus someone who you're best friends with for a quick spark time. You know, you met them in here and y'all did some things and y'all were good friends for a year, but then you kind of just fall off. And that was a very interesting thing to me as well. So that's all I got for this one so far. I would like to go into more details of everything. So just like, comment, share, let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to talk more about in detail. I'm out.